let's just not act like there isn't a serious side to psychedelics. There is. And my belief, my answer to that is that actually what it has to do with is proper facilitation and skill development around the use of psychedelics, and that's really what's important. All right, guys, we're back again with the PEM podcast, and I am Dorian. I usually open with what's relevant to me for the week, and I'm going to continue with that. The commentary that I talk about here sometimes doesn't always match up with the videos. We're going to be doing some stuff on psychedelics today, and right now I haven't been doing a ton of work with psychedelics at the moment. My last psychedelic experience was with 2CB, the real 2CB that was discovered by Alexander Shulgin, the same man who discovered MDMA and MDA, and at the time those were called research chemicals. And that was enough for me for a while. I had 2 experiences with it back to back in the same day. Each experience was about 4 to 6 hours, so it was a pretty heavy day, and I haven't had the need to go back for a while anyway. So we'll be exploring that a little more. Right now, where I'm at with things is just astonishment at the level of scamming that's going on out there. And I'm talking about that on a lot of other content that I'm producing. I'm going to do more videos on it. And, it's really interesting to see the psychology that's out there, because there are people out there who've been victimized. And so what they're doing is coming to our business and saying, you're a scam. And they have no proof, obviously, because we're not a scam, but they're just projecting their past experience onto us. And I'm starting to understand more and more why that's happening, because it's starting to feel like 90% of everything online is a scam at this point, especially the dating stuff, a lot of the psychedelic product side of things. There's just a huge number of scams going on out there, and I think the AI has just made it so easy. I just had someone I was talking to who I met on a site, and I asked them, they asked me if I had any book recommendations, sent me a picture of like a bookshelf, like they're in a Barnes & Noble or something. And I go, yeah, here's a book recommendation. They're like, oh yeah, I read that. And I go, oh really, what did you take from that book? And then they sent me a response that came clearly from ChatGPT or something similar. It's funny I don't know how to teach people this, right? But there are certain things that are noticeable about ChatGPT and these AI programs in the way that they speak. Even when you try to ask them to speak in someone else's voice, they have this very, it's like this comprehensive thing where they go, yeah, that book, has a detailed and comprehensive, dive into the complex world of human interaction and relationships, and you'll get like that kind of response, and you're like, okay, that doesn't sound right. Even if they ask it to be put in a certain person's voice, you can pick out these keywords. And then also, if they're good at it, and I think people are going to get better and better at this, they're going to learn how to edit those things and make them even more personable, and it'll probably reach a point where it's impossible to identify, at least directly in the way I'm doing it. So and then the videos, people impersonating other people impersonating people on TikTok, people impersonating celebrities, people doing all of this type of scamming, all with the aid of AI. So that's where I'm right now. I'm just blown away by it, and how are we going to manage in this world? I do not know. I just won't. It's getting to the point where I won't give, anyone real time unless they're willing to do a FaceTime. What I'm worried about is if they're going to do a FaceTime in the future where AI catches up and they're able to somehow change their appearance effectively there to imitate someone else. And then their voice, right? All of this is going to get to a point where I don't know what the management techniques are going to be for that. So that's kind of what my week's been about. There's a lot more there. I'm not going to go too in depth into that. I think that's a whole multiple episodes as we maybe even do guests and get people that are experts on this to speak further about it. So anyway, we're going to get this video. We're going to talk about psychedelics today. Let's get into it and see what we got.
Why is it that psychedelic use has played the role that it's played in your interests and your pursuit of knowledge? What do you think it's done for you that's been valuable?
I think we're in a weird place in society where the term drug is a blanket and it covers things that have vastly different effects. It covers caffeine, it covers nicotine, and it covers dimethyltryptamine, which is crazy. It's crazy that all those things are drugs. Adderall's a drug. Benzodiazepine is a drug. Xanax, there's a million of them. They're all different and they're all drugs. And the idea that psychedelics are a drug, for lack of a better term, that's what we use. I don't think that's what they are at all. I think they are probably why we became people. I think they are probably why society advanced. And I think every great ancient culture probably celebrated them and used them. It seems like there's so much evidence out of Egypt of the use of psilocybin, various different drugs, various different psychedelic experiences, the iconography of, and when he's not working in the summers, he gives these tours and they're very thorough. And he was a brilliant guy. I wish I could remember his name. Brilliant guy. So he takes us through showing us all this artwork, this incredible explaining why they had little penises, and that it was explaining the whole thing that big penises were thought to be barbaric, and it was not representative of like someone of class and dignity and education. And so we get to this pine cone, and he says to me, he goes, "Do you know what this represents?" And I said, "Is it the pineal gland?" And he goes, "Yes." And then we start this conversation of why these Catholics would have this enormous representation of the pineal gland, which they reference as the seat of the soul, and that this gland, which is in the center of your brain, is thought to be literally a third eye. And on reptiles, it actually has a cornea and a lens, this gland. Like, literally, it's exactly where the third eye of Eastern mysticism is. And they've got a representation of it right here. And it's thought to be where dimethyltryptamine is produced. This whole connection to it is so old that it seems like you go back to the John Marco Allegra stuff, you go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are the oldest version of the Bible, the only version that I believe the only version they have in Aramaic of all those stories. If John Marco Allegra is right, it all kind of makes sense. That these people were having these experiences much like the Greeks were with the Eleusinian mysteries, much like multiple different cultures in the Amazon, all over the world have experienced these profound ceremony experiences that lead to these journeys into the spirit world, these connections with higher consciousness, this something that when you're experiencing it seems very, very real, but also very preposterous when you try to explain it to people that aren't experienced. You know, it's like Hendrix. Have you ever been experienced? Well, I have. Like, it's that. Like, with that understanding that that's possible, the world changes, because now you know that that's possible. You could live your whole life and not know that the most shocking, profound thing in existence is 3 hits away. And all of a sudden, you're in a completely different universe in 20, 30 seconds. That's nuts. And the fact that that is dismissed, that people look at it as like, oh, you're just escaping reality, and you're like, it might be the source of civilization itself. It might be the source of language. It might be the source of the expansion of the human mind over a period of 2 million years, the doubling of the human brain over a period of 2 million years, which Terence McKenna felt directly coincides with the shifting of the tropical rainforest turning into grasslands, which would force these primates to experiment with new food sources, and these ungulate cows that were everywhere that would shit, and then these psilocybin mushrooms would grow in their shit. Observed primates flipping over these cow patties, looking for beetles and grubs and things to eat. It's everywhere. Like, you can see it all over Africa. If there's something on that, they're going to try it out. And if these things are trying it out and they're doing this over a period of 2 million years, and they develop language and culture and weapons, and they start thinking about things, and they become different than every animal around them. And this was McKenna's stoned ape theory, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And Dennis McKenna, who is, a legitimate scientist, Dennis explains it even better, because he explains it with the actual mechanisms that your brain, that the things that fire up when you encounter high-dose psilocybin experiences that would lead you to the development of language. Glossolalia, the connection of sounds and objects and bringing things together in a manner of communication. Also, they realized that in low doses it increases visual acuity. It makes people more amorous, makes people hornier. They're going to have more sex. They're going to be better hunters because they could see better. They're going to be a little more sensitive to the environment. They're going to be more aware. Edge detection's different. There's like so many different things that happen that if you're thinking about what made people people, it's a mystery. We want to pretend that we understand things because of the fossil record and this and that. Sure, we kind of understand, but every now and then we find a new human that we didn't even know exists, like Denisovans. What was that? Not even 20 years ago, I don't think. So now there's a whole other branch of human beings that they weren't even aware of 20 years ago. Whatever the fuck happened that took us from all the other primates that are still here and made us this, it's pretty profound. And I have a feeling that psychedelics were at least involved in that process. That's my belief. And my belief is that the sweeping Psychedelics Act of 1970 that they passed essentially to target civil rights activists and anti-war activists. That's what they did. They wanted to go after the hippies. And they went after the hippies with MK Ultra, with Tom O'Neill so brilliantly outlines in his book Chaos. They went after it and they created the Manson family. They created that family. They taught that guy how to do that so that that guy would kill people and he would be a psychopath, and now hippies would be psychopaths. And then all this anti-war shit would just get stopped by sensible people. Then Schedule 1, everything. Psilocybin, marijuana, all down the board. Everything becomes Schedule 1, the most illegal of illegal things. So all these people who are experiencing all these Ken Kesey people and, you know, all the LSD people of the 60s, all those people become criminals instantly. And they just threw water on the whole movement. And it worked. It really worked. It was Nixon and all the people that were in charge back then. If you look at what happened from 1960 to 1980, this confusing era of the 70s where the effects are wearing off.
So when the Spanish conquistadors came to the Americas and Francisco Pizarro had his historic moment with Atahualpa, the leader of the Aztecs, the Aztec emperor. Once they had crushed the Aztecs, one of the first things they had done was to outlaw the psilocybin mushroom and to make it a crime and a sin based off their Catholic authoritative body. And so this is something that's been done time and time again. I'm not a historian. I would be curious to have someone who is a true historian to talk about the history of, say, some of the pagan traditions in Northern Europe and what happened as organized religion spread through those areas, especially the Christian religions and the sects that came from that. So there's obviously the Catholics, and then there's a lot more there's changes in the Christian-based faiths into these different sects, which none of that am I qualified to really explain or talk about. So it would be nice to have someone who had a true historic background on that. I wonder what the interactions were with folks who were absolutely doing psilocybin mushrooms, even in Europe and other places, and having certain types of spiritual rituals around that. I have a feeling those interactions were probably also very negative and seen as, sinning or even devil worship. And of course, you could see what happened with kind of witchcraft and the burning of women at the stake and things like that. So clearly there's this very forceful adoption of laws that are extremely anti-psychedelic and lead to further kind of authority and control from really the wealthy individuals who are in power at that time. And that makes a whole lot of sense for me and for people who I think who have done psychedelics, because one of the great things from the perspective of those wealthy ruling people about religion is it kind of centralizes power and codifies it into this framework of supposed morality, and it's a very powerful tool for controlling people. And then you can see how centralized that control was really within the Catholic Church as well. If you look at this idea that only through an ordained, official priest And then, of course, you go up to the cardinal and the pope or whatever. But only through these official individuals do you have actual communication with God. So that's we use this term these days, gatekeepers, right? Those are some serious gatekeepers there. And what substances like LSD and or psilocybin, LSD, but psilocybin and other psychedelics and peyote and whatever psychedelic you want to mention, it gives you a direct line to the spiritual realm. And anyone who's had a large enough breakthrough on psychedelics, I think, finds it almost impossible to not call it a spiritual experience, even if they were atheists before. I think that was what was powerful about Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. That was a man who was very either atheistic or agnostic, very skeptical, rational journalist, going into this idea of like, what are these psychedelics about? And then you can see when he has his first real breakthrough, and then maybe a couple after that, he's like, okay, I don't really believe in quote unquote God the way these Christians or these other religious people necessarily put it, but I can't explain what I just experienced, and I would say it's a spiritual event. And you can see that that's happening with, I would say, pretty much everyone who reaches that point within psychedelic experiences, unless they're trying to argue something. There were some interesting people on like these TikTok multi-guests that I joined their conversations, and they seem to want to really argue a point by only allowing in the certain information that supported their point and then not taking in other information. So, and that's a conversation about ego and a whole different thing. But the point is if you're the authoritative body and here's this substance that can undermine your supposed authority and direct line to the true moral and ethical authority, the quote-unquote one and only God, then you have a major problem. And so then also the idea that as you go far enough into the psychedelic realms, you start to realize the pointless nature of violence and experience a real distaste for it. Any type of disharmony and feeling of conflict and fracturing of relationships and friction amongst people while you're on psychedelics is really an unpleasant feeling. It has an extremely powerful, unsettling feeling within oneself at certain levels. I can tell you when you fully break through, have a complete and utter dissolution of all that you are from an egoic standpoint, that actually that doesn't happen anymore. You just accept what is. That's a whole nother level. But along those stages of psychedelic experience, you really sense, and even at that level, the one I'm talking about, that full dissolution of ego, even at that one, you would have no interest in participating or being around violence or advocating for violence. So again, if we're talking about war in Vietnam or any war anywhere, it's not something that you're interested in. So if you are an authoritative government entity that is pursuing your own agenda and interests that requires violent conflict, and if you are trying to manage the economic situation and maintain people within certain degrees of slavery, and notice that I say certain degrees of slavery because all-out violently enforced, shackled slavery is a black form of it, very dark and solid form of slavery. But there are other forms of slavery that are ongoing today that are far more subtle and keep people trapped within this layer cake, to quote the movie out there. So it would make quite a lot of sense why these substances were so aggressively outlawed. And I think now that evidence is reaching the point that it's reaching, and this is part of my full theory of what the meaning and reason for life is, and I'm wondering if they're going to address that at all, and how they're going to address that through the perspective of what is consciousness and what are we doing here. I think, it makes a whole lot of sense that we are evolving towards a higher degree of consciousness based on what my belief of what is happening here, that the universe is attempting to become more and more aware of itself. And increased in awareness absolutely seems to be fostered by the usage of psychedelics. So that's an interesting fact. So, yeah, I think that's enough said about that for that time period. We can kind of start the video back up and see where we're at.
And everybody's doing coke and they have makeup on and they have big hair and the music sucks. It's like something happened. Something happened. And what happened was they completely removed the very thing that had changed culture so radically from the 50s to the 60s. Like, I'm a gigantic fan of 1960s automobiles. I love them. There's something about the shapes of them, the way they sound. I mean, part of it is that I grew up in the 80s, and those were the cars we all wanted. When we were kids, you know, if a guy drove by in a 1969 Camaro, we would all be like, whoa, look at it. Look at that thing. But there's something about those shapes. There's something about the designs of those cars that resonates so strongly today. A 1990 car ain't worth shit. Nobody wants your fucking 1990 car. 1990 Camaro, get the fuck out of here with that thing. But if you have a 1968 Camaro, people will stop in a parking lot and stare at it. What is that? I think those guys were on drugs. I think all those guys were on drugs. I think the guy who created a Corvette had to be on drugs. They felt something the same way Hendrix felt something when he was on stage playing guitar in a way nobody had ever heard before. That guy came out of nowhere, and everybody was like, what the fuck is he doing? It was so different that Eric Clapton watched him for the first time and was like, I should probably quit playing guitar. Like, what the fuck am I doing compared to this guy? Like, Jesus Christ, everybody was like humbled and confused by it. Psychedelic inspired, 100%. 100%. And there's something about...
So I'm going to have to disagree with Joe here. I think Joe is indicating that because of the sweeping laws that were instituted, that people stopped using drugs, and that just isn't the case. You know, especially within Silicon Valley and these places, people were continuing to use drugs all the way through. He uses this as a description for the car situation from the 60s to the 90s, and that, you know, cars from the 60s are far more attractive to folks. I guess it would depend on the car. I don't, you know, I think at points when we start to argue this stuff, and we start to give reasoning for what's happening, sometimes we go a little too far. You know, the materials were changing in, you know, the 1990s, the 80s, and, you know, at any point in time, materials are changing, technology is changing, you know, manufacturing processes are changing, people are looking for more efficiency, they're trying to figure out what the demand of the public is. You know, I'm not so certain that drugs are playing a role in everything that we're doing. I think you start to get a little too extreme with that argument, and I'm certainly a proponent for psychedelics, and I do think he's correct on a lot of things. Potentially, it very likely does seem that psychedelics may have had a role in our evolution, but I'm not going to get behind the car argument here. I think he's getting a little he's getting a little excited. That's all I would say. Anyway, yeah, let's
throwing water on that in the 1970s that I think has done a massive disservice to our civilization, a massive disservice, because it's equated these things with people that have poor discipline and bad social skills and ne'er-do-wells who fail in society, and that's not true. And all these people that I know that are billionaires, I know people that are like super rich people that run these financial institutions, and I know a lot of like brilliant venture capitalist guys and brilliant tech guys, and almost all of them are enthusiasts. Almost all of them have had these experiences, and they're all kind of quiet about it. And it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate because of these stupid laws that were passed 50 years ago. We've gotten ourselves in this weird crunch where we've made things illegal that could massively help people progress in life and sort things out.
So Joe's getting excited again. There have been negative results from psychedelic usage. Let's not forget that things can go very poorly with certain psychedelics. And I you know, to act like they just outlawed water or something, or you know, aspirin or you know, melatonin, it's not that. There are things about psychedelics that are dangerous. Now, I'm not a proponent of legislating to always create safety. I believe that safety and freedom are very touchy dynamic that are opposing forces to each other. However, to act like there's no risk involved with something like LSD is to live in denial. We have a very close personal friend right now whose son has started to drift into what appears to be some form of schizophrenia. They may be changing their categorization of how schizophrenia is actually officially described, I guess, because from what my friend was saying, they described that as when you're seeing people aren't there, sort of like John Nash in the movie Beautiful Mind. But I don't know how we decide what these, conglomeration of symptoms really equates to. That's one of the problems I have with the DSM and things like that. To me, his behavior is schizophrenic from what I'm being told. And it may be as a result of his usage of certain substances, possibly LSD, but also clearly there's a predisposition, potentially genetic, but maybe it's deeper than that. And genetics are such an interesting subject because you have epigenetics. And epigenetics is a really interesting idea that your genetic makeup can change based off your environment and your experiences. So, those who have a lot of prior trauma, possibly even ancestral trauma, may have certain genetic markers. We don't understand it, right? But again, when you start to slip into true lasting psychosis, that's a majorly negative outcome. And so I'm the founder of a psychedelic business company. I'm very much a believer in psychedelics, but I don't like when people start to act like there isn't an argument on the other side for those folks that did make it illegal. They had an argument. They had some reasonableness in saying, hey, we don't know if this is for everyone. I think they were wrong in what they did, and that the arguments for outlawing all of it certainly supported those wealthy interests that wanted to control people and pursue their agendas. But let's not be overly blanket, about this. Ayahuasca and LSD can be rather dangerous. I've seen firsthand the effects and what can happen. I believe there are some dangerous effects that can happen with bufo and the smokable forms of DMT. There's even risk with psilocybin. There are people, and I think it's far rarer, it's far less often, but there are people who even have lasting psychosis from a powerful psilocybin experience. So let's just not act like there isn't a serious side to psychedelics. There is. And my answer to that is that actually what has to do with is proper facilitation and skill development around the use of psychedelics, and that's really what's important. That these are tools that to some degree require, maybe more than just to some degree, they require sophisticated skill set to really manage them. And that's where I talk about the 8 fundamental skills of mental, emotional, spiritual skill development. But without getting into all that, I just feel like Joe's getting a little excited there. Let's really look at this, through the lens of the gray areas, not black and white. The psychedelics have dangers.
If we could figure out how to manage them correctly, if we could run proper studies about what is the correct dose, is there a person that has a certain sort of biological makeup that makes these drugs problematic? Should we find out? Maybe someone's allergic to them. There's many medications.
Okay, so he's addressing what I was talking about, and I just want to make sure he did. That's an important factor. I don't know that it's just, biology I think is tricky because we start talking about genetic markers and we start talking about something that is not necessarily fixed. It could be dynamic, it could be malleable and changeable. So let's see what he's going to say.
There are many different compounds and many plants and natural things that people are allergic to. Let's avoid that. Let's try to figure out what works for some people, what doesn't work. Let's have legitimate counselors that could guide people through experiences, people that have experienced it themselves and can understand how to do this with intent and possibly aid your life. They have been shown to be hugely beneficial for soldiers, for our military men and women coming back from overseas experiencing horrific trauma, to help them get past that. And yet they're illegal still. We're both middle-aged men, right? So who is telling us what we can and can't do? This is preposterous. This is other men our age that haven't had these experiences, maintaining this control on them.
This should not just be about psychedelics here. When it comes to what you're putting in your body, my opinion on this is it's your God-given right to put whatever you damn well decide to put in your body. And it is not the government or the church or anyone's business what you're deciding to put in your body. I understand that there is a potential, social impact to that based off of people becoming mentally ill or sick or damaging themselves in a way where they need care. But that comes back to deciding whether we should be free or whether we should be safe, and where that line should lie. With drugs, I think it's clear that it should lie on the side of it being your choice. And I think those that want to argue against that are negating the very obvious results of the war on drugs, which has been absolutely negative in every aspect. There is absolutely zero redeeming statistics or outcomes from the war on drugs. Nothing has come from that's been positive. It appears to me that it's an innate natural inclination for many species on the planet, especially human beings, to want to alter their consciousness. And how is it someone's business what you put in your body? You want to put rat poison in your body? If you're an adult, obviously as parents we should protect our children and educate them and hopefully steer them away from doing things that are really harmful for them. But as an adult especially, if your choice is to put something toxic or poisonous or even deadly in your body, that really should be your decision and no one else's. And as far as the social fallout and impacts to things like healthcare and things like that, we have to find a way to address that. There is no easy answer to that. It's not just psychedelics here. Really, all drugs should be legal, regulated for purity and quality, and allowed for you to purchase them. And we just need the education to really be robust around this. That's one of my major assertions about what happened with Purdue Pharma, is that actually would not have been possible if the Reagan administration and prior had not instituted a climate of just say no. And then you had people who were just say no, who then are completely unequipped and ill-prepared and unskilled to manage drugs at all, are then prescribed opioid medications through the authoritative, doctor, the authority figure, and then take these drugs and believe that it's not addictive, because then of course Purdue Pharma was pushing that agenda. So we created a climate that leads to further and further damage to people instead of educating them. The war on drugs was just a joke.
In a completely ignorant way. They don't even know what they are. They don't know what these things are. They don't know what the experience is, and yet they want it to be kept out of the hands of kids. We got to keep it off the streets. We've got to keep drugs away from our society. And you don't know what you're talking about. It might be why we're here, and it also, the absence of it, might be why we're so fucked up. It might be why we're so disconnected, why we're so disjointed, and our society is so hypocritical. I mean,
the absence of drugs are not, he's putting the chicken before the egg. The absence of drugs or psychedelics or anything else is not the reason we're so disjointed and disconnected at all. That's not the issue. The issue there is really deep. That's where it goes into, the theories that I've talked about in far, more previous episodes, where I talked about, farming and the, Garden of Eden allegory and an alternative interpretation of what's going on. When we shifted into agrarian civilizations and we got into ownership, we moved away from harmony with ourselves and with the environment. That's what happened. Now these drugs, especially psychedelics, point that out to some degree. Maybe not the theory on farming and agrarian civilizations and how that affected us, but it does point out that, wait a second, we seem to be completely out of harmony. We seem to view nature as this inanimate object that we can do whatever we want with, and that it's not spiritually imbued. And then you take, these psychedelics and you go, oh wow, the planet's alive. These trees are very alive. They're conscious. There's a spiritual, presence within them. And then you have this kind of awakening, at least to that part. But to say that the drugs are, and the legal circumstance around drugs are what's holding us back from being, living in harmony with each other and feeling connected that's not accurate. It's, these people were trying to figure this out through different economic strategies, communism, socialism, capitalism, all these different approaches to try and figure out how do we create a society in which we're more cohesive. And some of the people who were idealists, I think, really believe that those ideas would work. But when you get into the actual implementation, like communism sounds wonderful on paper, but when you actually attempt to implement it, it does not work. So I think Joe's going off again in a way that I would not agree with. The legal circumstance around drugs is not what's causing our society to be such a mess and for us to be disjointed. What's causing it is our insistence on operating in a format of ownership and control. Ownership and control of land and things and plants and animals as inanimate objects, and then that further extends to ownership of people as basically objects as well. All the way down to the level of romantic relationships in which we have this feeling that we own this other person. It goes so deep into our psyche, and that's why the theory then becomes about ego. And ego, I do believe, really was, supercharged by the agrarian shift of ownership and identity through ownership, and then we arrived here. So psychedelics, I do believe, are a very potent force that is in opposition to ego, and especially my definition of ego. Again, I've discussed that before. But it isn't the reason that we're disjointed, disconnected, and isolated, and living outside of harmony with ourselves and the environment. That is not the reason for it. So I have to disagree with Joe there.
The most pro-life people are also pro-death penalty. It's like across the board, everything. The people that, want no crime but don't want to stop the emergence of crime by funding programs to try to fix the inner cities, and they want to. Our whole thing is disconnected. And I have a feeling that a big part of that is that we have not been given access to tools that have helped people literally become what we are today. If you read Brian Murarescu's work, and if he's correct, and these people that are studying the Eleusinian mysteries and the literal emergence of democracy as we know it, probably all of it came out of psychedelic experiences.
I don't know. Let's stop it there just real quick. Yeah, I think he's too broad there again. What happened with those particular structures of governing bodies is an attempt to try and manage a completely different ideology around our existence with the planet and our environment and each other. And again, this comes down to ownership. Within kind of the true through and through hunter-gatherer experience, things are not really seen from the lens of ownership. There may be, in certain instances, the lens of territory, and there were tribes that would fight and war with each other. But as you dig even into that history, you can see that the more aggressive, deadly, and toxic interactions of those kind were usually perpetrated by agrarian civilizations. So when you see, like in Papua New Guinea, one of the earliest civilizations, you'll find that the farmers are the ones who just launch horrific violence onto their hunter and gatherer neighbors. So, and that happened across the board pretty much everywhere if you read the book Guns, Germs, and Steel. So once we shifted into the true, full and global agrarian, paradigm, then that's what we're attempting to manage through democracy, dictatorships, autocracies, communist parties, socialist parties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think to make it about the drugs is, again, way too broad. Drugs are influencing people's minds and their perspective on things. It certainly influenced mine. But I think he's not. This is where I have the problem even in psychedelics completely with people thinking the psychedelic is the root fundamental. It is not the baseline. It is the 8 root fundamentals of mental, emotional, and spiritual healing, skill development that is the true baseline. And the psychedelics are just a supercharged vehicle that can get you from point A to point B much faster. But they aren't what's governing the real problems on this planet. So I want to make that clear there. would love to discuss that further with Joe if I ever got the chance, but yeah. Okay, guys, as you can see, I don't always agree with what's being said. I love psychedelics. They scare me. I respect them. They're like the ocean, right? I love the ocean. I love surfing. I don't go out and 50-foot surf like some of these guys who are truly trained to do that. I feel a deep spiritual connection with the ocean, all those things. With psychedelics, same thing. When I was a kid, I was really reckless and didn't have some of the traumas and things that are buried within myself. And so, after experiences with life that as you get older, I think many of you can relate to getting older and finding that things become a little more difficult, not just physically, but even mentally and emotionally. That's the hard battle, and that's where it becomes very impressive for those who are able to really rise above that. But yeah, the skill set involved with psychedelics is what the deep importance is here. And I think we need to begin to ask ourselves fundamental questions about the nature of reality, the earth, plants and animals, our interactions with them and our perspective. And looking at that historically from hunting and gathering to agrarian seems to be very fundamental in all of this. As you can see, the mindset is vastly different from a group of people that see the earth as alive. When we hear that, the earth is alive and as a being and is like even taught in like school, oh, these people saw the earth as a deity of sorts, a god of sorts, Mother Earth. I think for many of us in the West, I know for myself, I don't want to speak for other people, I saw that as allegory or metaphor, or these people don't believe that, right? The earth is just, a bunch of dirt and rocks and, streams, and then there's these things that grow in them, plants, and then there's the animals. And the idea that this whole thing is actually alive and sentient to some degree and actually has a consciousness, possibly even some sort of will, seems ridiculous. But as you dig further into the way those people thought, and especially understanding the usage of psychedelics, you find that no, for them it's very literal, extremely literal. They did not see it as allegorical, metaphorical. They see it as literal. The earth is alive and conscious. They saw, plants as being very conscious and having wisdom within them, real wisdom, like a master teacher. Animals as ancestors, basically a form of reincarnation or type of continuation of the life force and life cycle from the death of loved ones and older generations being cycled through, the other life forms on this planet and being related to them. It's a vastly different perspective, and you can see how much more harmonious that idea is and living within the framework and in harmony with the environment and each other than looking at the world like it's an object to be dominated, a mind taken from, used for whatever convenience and way of doing that. Think about that. If the earth truly is a sentient being, then we're treating the earth like a whore. And I mean that in the worst possible way, whore. Like, there's a lot of ways you could interact with a sex worker, but I mean, like, not to call out any cultures or anything, but just imagine the worst human traffickers mistreating someone into sex trafficking and just beating them and having them be used in the worst way. That's what we've done to our planet. So, in that regard, I do think psychedelics have the potential for us to wake up to that a bit. But we've also created an enormous, deep hole for ourselves with the population levels we have and our need for, sourcing food and energy and maintaining our way of life. We've tamed ourselves, and in taming ourselves, we've lost our connection with the planet. I can't walk in the jungle barefoot with a loincloth on and not get bit by, spiders and mosquitoes and possibly deadly snakes. I don't have that. Even on psychedelics, I don't believe I'd be able to do that. When I was in Costa Rica, I saw people do that in the middle of the night. And in very dangerous forests where there are all kinds of dangerous, venomous things walking around, there were natives that could walk through there at night without light and somehow come out unscathed. You tell me how they were doing that. That's not just drugs. That's beyond drugs. That is true harmony with your environment. So I think we need to continue this conversation and not always be focused on just the drugs themselves. Yeah, that's a facet. It's important. But we have lost our way to such a degree that getting that back, I don't know. That's why I'm concerned about an extinction event coming for us. I think we're in a really, really deep deficit right now. Not to leave it on a really ugly note, guys, but it is a bit pessimistic there. Hopefully there's some optimism coming. We will have to see as time continues, but I am going to leave it there for today.